based on Does War Make Us Richer? Economics Explained. In the annals of modern economic history, few events loom as large or as devastating as the Great Depression of 1929. To understand the scale of this catastrophe, one must look beyond the sepia-toned photographs of soup lines and failing banks. The statistics tell a harrowing story. Worldwide GDP collapsed by over 15%. For modern context, the 2008 mortgage crisis and the ensuing Great Recession events that defined a generation's financial anxiety caused a drop in worldwide GDP of just 1%. The Depression was not merely a downturn, it was an economic apocalypse. It was a time mired by poor policy decisions, largely because the modern global economy was in its infancy, and policymakers were attempting to drive a machine they did not yet fully understand. However, a common narrative persists among students of history regarding the conclusion of this dark chapter. The prevailing wisdom suggests a simple cause and effect relationship. World War II ended the Great Depression. On paper, this logic seems sound. As the war machine roared to life, factories were constructed at breakneck speeds. Armies of previously unemployed men were drafted into service. Massive infrastructure projects were funded, and governments cast aside budgetary restraints to create the largest fiscal stimulus in human history, all in the name of victory. The economics of war remain as relevant today as they were in the 1940s. The United States, currently the world's largest economy, also boasts the world's largest military budget. Its single largest employer is Walmart, but coming in second is the armed forces. Military policy and economic policy are inextricably linked, functioning alongside income tax and interest rates as levers of national influence. Yet this historical precedent begs a fundamental and perhaps controversial question. Is war actually good for the economy? If the model worked to rescue the world in the 1940s, what prevents it from being a viable economic strategy today? To answer this, we must strip away the political rhetoric and examine the mechanics of defense spending, the nature of employment, and the true definition of economic value, the illusion of employment and economic indicators. When governments and economists assess the health of a nation, they rely on a dashboard of key indicators: GDP figures, growth rates, inflation, share market prices, and, crucially, unemployment. Because politics is inherently tied to public perception, it often becomes the top priority of incumbent administrations to ensure these figures appear as robust as possible, even if the underlying reality is less glamorous. Unemployment, in particular, is a big-ticket item that directly influences election outcomes. In a theoretically ideal world, the correct method to lower unemployment is to foster an economy that grows in line with or exceeds population growth, maintaining a healthy service sector that provides gainful, well-paying jobs. However, for a world leader facing an election with poor polling numbers, there are shortcuts. A significant loophole in economic reporting is the definition of employment itself. In many jurisdictions, an individual is considered employed if they work as little as 1 hour per week. Consider a fast food chain like McDonald's. An employer can choose to hire far more people on casual, variable rosters than full-time employees, even if the total number of labor hours remains constant. Instead of employing 10 people full-time, they might employ 30 people on short shifts. On a nationwide level, this inflates employment statistics, making the economy look healthier than it is. This phenomenon of underemployment, workers who have jobs but are actively seeking more hours, is a pervasive issue in modern economies. It serves as a reminder that economic indicators must always be taken with a grain of salt. Governments can further manipulate these figures by altering definitions, such as excluding students from the labor pool, or by directly hiring more people into government agencies. While teachers, infrastructure workers, and park managers are essential, the military stands out as a unique, massive employer. In many countries, military recruitment is intense and sometimes mandatory. This is rarely because the military is desperately short of personnel for defense purposes. Rather, the armed forces serve as an excellent vehicle for absorption. They provide young men and women with employment, skills, and training. In this light, the military acts as a gigantic form of social welfare, employing hundreds of thousands who might otherwise struggle to find work in an increasingly automated and outsourced job market. While having a strong military ensures national security, from a strictly fiscal perspective, one must ask, is this the most efficient use of capital? A breakdown of a typical military budget reveals that only about 1/4 of spending goes directly to personnel wages. Approximately 1/3 is consumed by operations and maintenance, keeping ships, aircraft, and bases functional. Another quarter is dedicated to procurement, buying new tanks and planes, while the remainder covers research, development, and discretionary expenses. By comparison, Social Security budgets in most developed nations see over 90% of funds going directly to recipients. While the military fulfills a vital protective role, if we are strictly analyzing economic stimulus, it is an inefficient delivery system. The government could, theoretically, pay a private corporation like Walmart to keep people employed. There is no functional economic difference between the government giving money to a defense contractor or a private institution. The primary difference is political. Defense spending is politically palatable. It is viewed as patriotism and security, whereas direct payments to private firms are viewed as corporate welfare. The broken window fallacy and the GDP trap. If one looks exclusively at GDP, figures a mistake in and of itself. War periods appear to generate an uptick in growth. This is due to the intense government spending required to fund the war effort and the subsequent rebuilding of infrastructure destroyed during the conflict. GDP measures economic activity, not economic health or wealth accumulation. Therefore, war appears profitable on a balance sheet. However, this is a classic manifestation of the broken window fallacy, a parable introduced by the French economist Frédéric Bastiat. The fallacy posits that if a hooligan breaks a shopkeeper's window, the shopkeeper must pay a glazier $20 to fix it. The glazier then spends that $20 on something else, circulating the money. One might argue that the broken window was good for the economy because it created work and increased GDP by $20. But this ignores the hidden reality. The shopkeeper has lost $20 that he would have otherwise spent on a new pair of shoes or a book. The economy has not gained. It has merely diverted resources to repair destruction. The shopkeeper is not richer. He is merely back to where he started, but with $20 less in his pocket. War is the broken window fallacy writ large. In a perfect world where standing armies were unnecessary, there would be far more efficient ways to apply fiscal stimulus to benefit unemployment and overall well-being. We do not live in a perfect world, and nations, especially those with global interests like the United States, must maintain militaries. Consequently, they utilize defense spending as a politically approved form of fiscal stimulus. But we must not confuse necessity with profitability. The purpose of an economy. This leads to a big-picture philosophical question that transcends monetary policy or political ideology. What is the purpose of an economy? It is a fundamental inquiry that many economists overlook as they bury themselves in microeconomic trivialities. The ultimate purpose of an economy is to supply the satisfaction of consumers. A job is only economically valuable if it adds value to the economy as judged by consumers. By this metric, military jobs fall short. They do not produce consumer goods or capital goods that can be used to produce other consumer goods. Tanks, fighter jets, and missiles do not improve the daily standard of living for the average citizen in the way that housing, food, or entertainment does. Therefore, they are not of value to the consumer economy. While there is an intangible benefit to safety and secure borders, most nations could achieve this with a fraction of their current budgets. Furthermore, war can actively degrade an economy. Returning to the example of the American war effort during World War II, the narrative of economic booming ignores the opportunity cost. Factories that were retooled to make munitions and workers sent overseas were not being used for their primary purpose. These were resources that would have otherwise been creating consumer goods to improve the quality of life for their fellow man. Instead, they were producing warships designed to end the lives of others. The greatest tragedy of war is, of course, the loss of human life. But even through the cold, detached lens of a heartless economist, death is a catastrophic loss of human capital. Workers who die and factories that are bombed are permanently removed from the economic equation. Years of education, training, and expertise are instantly wasted. Since the purpose of an economy is to increase the standard of living for its participants, and war destroys both the participants and the means of production, war achieves the exact opposite of economic success: the innovation myth and post-war prosperity. A common counter-argument is that war drives technology. Proponents point to inventions like canned food, microwave ovens, jet engines, and the Internet, which were born out of the quest for military superiority. While true, this is a narrow argument. These technological side effects are not the primary motivator of military R&D. In reality, much more innovation occurs in a consumer-oriented economy, where companies fight to gain a competitive edge, not over an enemy combatant, but over other companies competing for consumer dollars. Corporate R&D is almost exclusively focused on improving lives to generate profit. If the resources and expertise diverted into making slightly faster fighter jets were instead poured into healthcare, energy, or consumer tech, quality of life, improving technology would likely be far more advanced today. If war is inherently destructive and economically inefficient, how do we explain the undeniable prosperity of the United States following World War II? If it wasn't the war itself, what was it? The answer lies in geopolitics and industrial capacity. By the end of the war, the USA was the de facto leader of the Allies. It used this leverage to negotiate the formation of the United Nations and, more importantly, the Bretton Woods system. Bretton Woods effectively made the US dollar the reserve currency of the world and the United States the center of the global economy. Furthermore, the US was an industrial powerhouse that made the majority of its money through manufacturing. In the post-war landscape, American manufacturing was incredibly competitive, not just because it was efficient, but because the factories of its competitors in Japan, Germany, France, and the UK had been reduced to rubble. The United States was the only major economy left standing with its industrial base intact. It was able to dictate the terms of the world economy for the latter half of the 20th century. This unique geopolitical advantage had far more to do with its economic prosperity than the act of war itself. The U.S. became rich despite the destruction of the war, profiting from the vacuum left by the devastation of others. Conclusion: most economists are not moral idealists advocating for the complete dismantling of militaries. We understand that the defense of nations and the projection of influence are valuable in a non-economic capacity. However, the public psyche and economic consensus are shifting away from the antiquated idea that wars are good for an economy. We all desire to improve our wealth and live happier, more fulfilled lives. The study of economics explores how individuals, institutions, and nations pursue that wealth and use it to achieve prosperity. Wars, by their very nature, are events of massive destruction. They destroy capital, labor, and infrastructure. They divert resources from creation to annihilation. While they may temporarily spike GDP through government spending, this is a hollow victory, a broken window repaired at the cost of future prosperity. War should, in no uncertain terms, be confused with anything that contributes actively to increasing wealth or improving the Paris's quality of human life. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any videos. See you soon.